In this presentation, we're going to kick off the Snowman project, and we're going to explore the basic pipeline for 3D modeling in Cinema 4D. And we'll talk a little bit about different methods to model content. We'll also talk about texturing and lighting, and then we'll explore the final output, the rendering to the picture viewer. So we'll get started with this project. I've launched Cinema 4D, but I have not yet established a project folder. Now, there's a couple of different ways that I can do this. I'm just going to jump out to the desktop and I'll right click and create a new project folder. Now, I'm actually going to create a class folder first, so I'll call this VCIL1640. You can call this class folder project anything that you want as long as you stay organized. I'm going to go into the class folder and I'm going to right click and choose to create a new folder. This is going to be my Snowman project folder. Now, I could do this directly through Cinema 4D. I'll close that. That's my project folder. If I'm in Cinema 4D, before I even create any content, I could very quickly choose to do a file, save as, and at this point, if I save out to my desktop, if I wanted to generate new folders on the fly, I could create a new folder, and I could call this 3D Design. That's my new class folder, and I'll create. And inside 3D Design, I'll click the new folder and choose to call this Snowman. Okay, so as not to confuse myself, I'm going to cancel this, and I'll cancel this just for a moment. I'll jump back out and make sure I get rid of one of these folders. Okay, maybe I'll get rid of the VCIL1640 and go in favor of this user-friendly name of 3D Design. Now, inside 3D Design, I have not established my project folder, so I'll do that again, but this time I'll create that folder directly through Cinema 4D. So I'll quickly do a file, save as, I'll go into the class folder. This is where I'll generate my project folder. Now, it's really important that we stay organized and that we create project folders for every project that we're creating. This will give us an opportunity to bundle all of our assets, to keep track of references and any kind of pre-production work that we might capture. So I'm going to save this project as Snowman01. Now, I'm giving the project an appropriate title according to the project I'm working on, and I'm also including 01. 01 is the incremental version of this project that I'm working on. And as I make significant progress, I'm going to increment this number. I'm going to bump it up so that I build in a history into the project production. So as I work, I'll end up with Snowman 2, 3, and so on. I'm not going to change the name when I'm done with the project. I'm just going to let whatever the final number be. So when I go back and look at this project, I'll see a whole bunch of Snowman projects, Cinema 4D files in here, and the one with the biggest number is the most current version. And you'll find out, I'll show you here in just a few minutes, that Cinema 4D actually works this and encourages you to use that process in its workflow. And I'll show you that in just a few minutes. So I'm going to save this project in the right location. I like to always just jump out and do a quick audit, make sure that I'm saving in the right location. So I'm going to go into my class folder, into my project folder, and I can see my project. So I'm confident that I'm in the right location, and so now I can get this project started. So I'm going to start off with the basic body of the Snowman, and this will be really easy to model because it's based on very simple spheres, right? So I'm going to go up to this little cube drop-down menu, and if I click and hold on this, this is where we can generate our parametric primitives. So if I click and hold on this, I'm just going to roll my mouse over the sphere, and when I release the mouse, it generates that first sphere. Now, this is a parametric primitive, as we discussed in the previous presentations, that I have a primitive 3D object that's being generated based on these numeric parameters, which I can change. I'm going to let these all default for now, but what I am going to do is I'm going to change the name of the sphere. This is going to be the base of the Snowman, and so I'll just double-click on the sphere in the Object Manager, and I'll just call this Bottom. This will be the bottom of the Snowman body. Now, I'm going to generate a second sphere to act as the middle of the Snowman body, so I'll do the same thing. I'll click and hold on this cube. I'll generate a new sphere, and before I even move this, I'm going to double-click on it and name it Middle. Okay, now you can tell that I have the middle sphere selected because it's highlighted in yellow in the object manager. It's tough to see inside the perspective viewport because these two spheres are essentially exactly the same and they're occupying the same position. When we create content in Cinema 4D, by default it generates it at 0, 0, 0, the origin of this 3D space. So 0 along the X, 0 along the Y, and 0 along the Z. But I can tell which one I have selected through the object manager. Okay, and so with the middle object selected, I'm going to roll my mouse over, and it's very important that I only move this content according to one axis until we get the hang of moving things around. What that's going to do, when I roll my mouse over the Y axis or the up axis, when I click and drag, again, no matter how kind of loose I am with my mouse technique here, I'm only moving this content according to the y-axis. And this becomes very important because what that's doing is that we're stacking this object directly on top of the other object. It's not floating back in space along the z or floating left and right along the x. It's just going straight up. So we can ensure that that object is aligned properly. Okay, now I want this object to be a little bit smaller. So with the middle object selected, I'm going to go down into the Attributes Manager, and I'm going to find the radius, and I'm just going to key in a value. I'm going to highlight the 100 centimeters, and I'll key in a value maybe of 75 and hit return. And I think that's probably the way I'm going to go with it. Maybe I'll take it a little bit smaller, but I think for now, this is probably about where I want to be. You know, in fact, maybe I'll go down to 70. Okay, I can always change this later. Just move that back down a little bit. And what I'm looking for as I move this down is I'm looking at the bottom edge of this object, and you can see it's highlighted with an orange highlight. And what I'm looking to do is I'm moving that down, and as soon as I see that orange edge start to disappear, I know that those objects are overlapping. Now there's other ways to ensure that those objects are overlapping. So in other words, I don't want this really floating in space. I want this object to sit on the base of the bottom of the snowman. And we'll take a look here in a few minutes at other ways that we can manage that. Now I want to build the snowman head at this point, and so I'll do the same technique. I'll get started with a sphere, and I'll move this sphere up according to the y-axis. Okay, I don't want this huge bobblehead looking snowman, so I'll double click that sphere, and I'll call this top. And I'm going to reduce the radius of that object down maybe to like 50. Okay, so now the head's floating in space. It's also outside my perspective viewport, so I need to do some scene navigation here. Now, in the previous getting started presentations, we discovered that we can click and hold on the pan to pan around, and that'll be the technique that I want to use. In addition, I could dolly in and out. I can click and hold, and as I drag in and out, I can dolly in and out, and then of course I can orbit as well. Rather than rolling my mouse all the way over here to the top right hand side of the screen and clicking and holding, I'm going to prefer to use the quick key shortcuts. And the ones that I'm going to use are, I'm going to hold down on a Mac the Option key, Alt on a PC, and I'm going to click and drag, and that'll allow me to orbit. I have a mouse wheel, so I'm going to use that to zoom in and out. And then I'm going to hold down the number 1 key when I want to pan. Okay. Alternatively, I could use the number 1 key to pan. I could use the number 2 key and click and drag to dolly, and use the number 3 key to click and drag into orbit. But I like using the Option and the mouse wheel. So I still have the top of the snowman selected, and I'm just going to grab that snowman top by the y-axis, and I'll click and drag and just move that down until I start to see it intersecting. Again, I'm looking for the bottom edge of that highlight to start to disappear, and that's one indicator that content is intersecting. Now I'm going to do a quick audit of my scene. I've modeled the basics of my snowman in pretty short order, but what I want to do is I want to make sure that I did in fact only move these spheres according to the y-axis. And the way that I can do that is I'm going to start with the bottom. I'll select the bottom, and I'm going to look down here into the position coordinates, and I can see that this sphere is still in its original position. So it's at 0, 0, 0 according to X, Y, and Z. I'm going to select the middle object, and I'm going to look at its position coordinates, and I can see that X is at 0. That's good. So it did not move along X. I did not move it along X. And I can see that its Z is 0, so it did not move along its Z axis. Okay, now remember, if you're confused about which one's X and which one's Z, there's a little widget down here in the bottom left-hand corner that will remind you that the blue axis is Z, the red axis is X, and the green axis is Y. And this is not an arbitrary thing, and we'll talk in the next presentation a little bit about, what the difference between up, down, forward, backward, left, right is in a 3D space. Finally, I'm going to grab the top sphere, and I'll just look at the position coordinates. Now, in the event that you moved things around and you thought you had one axis selected, but the object kind of floated out in space, and I can move this back, and it might look like it's more or less lined up, right? So I've moved that back according to 3 axes, and I've just, in my viewport, it looks like it's pretty good. Let me just kind of do something like this. So in this case, it may look like, oh yeah, it's kind of lined up. There's something weird going on, but kind of looks okay. When I orbit around, you can see that, whoa, wait a second. That doesn't look so good, unless the snowman is looking down at his shoelace untied or something like that. And that's because, based on the perspective view, we might have things lined up, but if they're not lined up in a 3D space in an appropriate way, things could fly all out of whack when we start animating or choosing a different perspective. So I'm going to go back to my snowman head, which I called top, and if I want to fix this, there's a couple of really simple ways that I can do this. What I'm going to choose to do, make sure that the top is selected. I'm going to go down into the position coordinates, and I know that I don't want this to move around the X, so I'm just going to highlight that value. I'm going to type in 0 and hit return. I'm going to do the same thing for Z. I'm just going to 0 out that value. And now I know that the only difference between the position of these 3 objects is its Y value, or its vertical position. Okay, so now I know that I'm lined up along X and Z. And so as I orbit around this snowman, everything's lined up. Even though it's a little low on X, so I'll just lift it back up. Okay, now if that is a little bit clumsy and abstract for you, alternatively what we can do, if we need to, is we can just always delete the object, recreate it, and as long as I didn't move the base of my snowman, when I generated that first shape, I know it's in the center of my world, in the center of my 3D world. So when I create my another shape, it's occupying that same space. So they're effectively aligned already. They're occupying the same exact space. And so I'll just double click on this sphere. I'll call it top again. I'll change its radius size, and I'll just move this object up again. And I'm really just eyeballing it. I'm not paying too close attention to what the Y coordinates is, but as you see, as I slide this around, I'm getting this little heads up display telling me how far I'm moving it from its previous position. And I'm just looking for a little bit of overlap there. And that's pretty good. So I'm pretty satisfied with my modeling job so far for the base of the snowman. So I'm going to say File, Save. Remember, I've already named this Snowman01, so I can just choose File, Save. Okay. Now I've saved the progress of my project, and now I'm going to make some bold design decisions here in the next presentation. So what I might want to do is save the project that I'm working on, and then do a quick File, Save As, and increment this file name. I could call this 2, and I'll hit Save. And so now that should give me some degree of confidence to experiment with this. And if I do something crazy and I introduce some stuff and I destroy things, that's okay, because not only can I undo, but I can also go back to the previous version and try again if I need to. Okay? And as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, Cinema 4D encourages this workflow of incrementing your file names and building in a history to your project production, because not only can I choose File Save, I can choose File Save As, but I can also do Save Incremental. Now the cool thing about Save Incremental is it'll take your file name, and it'll take even a number that you generated, and it'll just add 1 to the end of that project. So if I choose Save Incremental, you'll see that my project went from Snowman02 to Snowman03. So by choosing File Save Incremental, it will bump up the file name. So let's go see what's happening inside our project folder. And just as like I suspected it's generating new files every time I choose File, Save, Incremental. Okay, so now I wouldn't encourage you to, every time you save the project, to save incremental, but we do want to build into this process generating new files as we go. This project will work on for a handful of hours, several hours, maybe a week or two over the course of a couple of weeks. So I would encourage at least every session where you sit down and work on this project, make sure that you save and then save incremental. So you're at least generating one, if not more, new files every time you sit down and work on this project. We'll take a look at some additional methods of modeling and arranging content. We'll also talk about the difference between up, down, left, right, forwards, and backwards in 3D space, but we'll do that in the next presentation.